Good evening, you're watching Visions. I'm Megan Searle, and our guests tonight are Kurt Esser and Jessie Taylor from the Justice Project. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, can we start by just a little bit of an introduction of who you are and where you've come from? Maybe Jessie.
Sure. I am a student in arts law at Monash University, nearly finished, in my 7th year next year. I have a background in hands-on activism and advocacy for refugees and asylum seekers, particularly in immigration detention around Australia. I've been visiting immigration detention centres for around about 3 years and was co-opted to the board of the Justice Project in early 2004.
Wonderful.
That's me.
And yourself, Kurt?
I'm a commercial barrister. I've been at the bar for over 20 years. I got very agitated about what the government was doing about refugee law reform. The conditions in detention centres, to me, seemed appalling. And I kind of crossed over from an interest in commercial law to taking a much more active interest in refugee law reform. And together with like-minded friends and prominent people, we decided that we would do something about it last year, and we established the Justice Project. So, as well as people like Jessie, who are very valuable members of our board, we have people like Julian Burnside QC, who's been a great advocate of refugee law reform, Malcolm Fraser, who's also been a major spokesman for refugee law reform, and others such as Irving Solwick. We have a professor of international law, we have a professor of politics who also joined our board, and with other friends and experts, for example, on immigration matters and visas, we joined together and we decided we were going to do something, and we were going to publicise the fact that both parties seemed to want to bury the idea of refugee law reform in last year's election. So we decided that we would get together and we would question politicians and candidates to ask them really where they stood on these issues. So we devised a questionnaire. It was settled. We sent the questionnaire out. We gave everyone notice we were doing this. We told them we were going to mark them out of 100.
Yeah.
We did that, and the results, taken seat by seat, were tabulated, and we used that as the basis of a how-to-vote card. So in approximately 65 seats across Australia, in probably the most politically sensitive ones, we handed out how-to-vote cards and made how-to-vote cards accessible on the website to people who wanted to, as we put it, stand up for a fair go and vote pro-refugee.
Okay, so these weren't politically specific, they weren't party specific?
The Justice Project is very deliberately non-partisan. We wanted to approach it from quite a perspective of not attacking any particular party, not attacking any particular policy, particularly because the refugee policy as it currently stands, mandatory detention was introduced by the Keating Labor government in the early 90s. Yes. So it hasn't just been Howard's government or the Liberal government or anything like that. So we wanted to approach it from a very broad perspective and not wanting to alienate anyone, wanting to be very fair and objective and simply present the information as it was given to us or as those questions were answered by those members of Parliament in those specific electorates. So no, it was not a party political campaign at all.
And obviously in the same way, you're not supporting any particular party.
No,
so you're not going against it and you're not supporting any. That's a great place to be. So from an outsider's perspective, we're purely looking at the issue.
That's right.
Not at the party side. Now, obviously, well, not obviously, I suppose, you need money to run this.
Yes.
Where do you find your funding from?
Well, just to tell you a little bit about our structure first, Megan, we're incorporated under the Victorian Associations and Corporations Act, so that we actually are a proper organisation. We try to run ourselves in a business-like fashion. So we have a public officer and we have properly functioning board. We'll be, for example, publishing our financial statements on our website. Yep. We're totally open, totally transparent, and we want to encourage people to give to us because we are transparent, we are business-like, we have our own office. But we unfortunately have to rely entirely on donated funds. So it's just fellow travellers, people who are in agreement with our philosophies who give us money, and we also rely very heavily on volunteers. So Jessie, for example, she enlists her friends. Other people on the board also enlist their friends. And it's largely word of mouth, and we have a very active website where we ask people to register their interest, and we register them either as volunteers or people on our mailing list, and eventually the cap will go around asking people to put money in, but for the time being we're pretty good.
And what exactly does the Justice Project do?
Well, you've heard already about our first project, which is in the lead up to the election, getting the refugee issue on the agenda. The second project is unrolling very currently. It's been supporting the inquiry into the possible implementation of a Charter of Rights and Responsibilities for Victoria, which has in late December been. The report has been submitted, the recommendations have been submitted to the State Parliament, and yeah, we're just sort of waiting to see what happens there. But we've been doing a lot of work facilitating submissions to the inquiry. We've been encouraging all of our volunteers and really having quite a presence in Victoria, trying to encourage people to make submissions. You know, what do you want to see in a Charter of Rights and Freedoms? What are the things that you want to be protected by our laws? What are the things that you consider to be less important at this stage? Because Australia is actually the only Western country, the only Western jurisprudence without a federal Bill of Rights or without some kind of statutory protection of human rights. So we wanted to start in Victoria. The ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, has a Charter of Rights. But Victoria, if it adopts these recommendations, will be the first state in Australia to have a statutory protection of human rights, and we're very excited about it happening.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? It's hard to believe that we actually don't have one.
Yeah, it is, really.
And to be the only Western country that doesn't have one.
Unfortunately, some people think that we already do have one.
Yeah,
people are talking about taking the fifth. People talk
they watch
about
too much Law and Order.
Yeah.
People talk about Miranda rights, and all sorts of misinformation is pretty obvious out there. And in fact, Professor Williams highlighted that in his report, that there was a huge amount of ignorance. And people are very well informed, but on exactly the wrong subject.
Yeah, exactly. And that obviously is from our television and from a lot of American television that we watch.
Yeah. And one other thing which I think is really important to note about what we're looking at with the current bill, the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, is that it's not going to be the American style sort of let's all sue each other for this and that, and the phrase has been used, it's not going to be a lawyer's picnic. So I think that's a really important point for people to note if they're worried about what does this mean, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with this. It's really not an extreme piece of legislation. It protects basic things like freedom of speech, basically basic rights that all of us would, if we think about it for 1 minute, of course we need these things. So it's really just enshrining those rights in a way that's just on paper, which just gives a little bit of protection.
To us all.
Yeah, I think Kurt's going to talk a little more about that.
Lovely. Well, hold that thought. You're watching Visions. I'm Megan Searle, and we'll be back after a short break.